how Darth Vader killed every member of 3 X-Wing squadrons by himself. Shortly after the Battle of Yavin, the rebels went back into hiding. Darth Vader, with the help of renegade archaeologist Dr. Aphra, had managed to track down the Empire's most wanted, Luke Skywalker. He jumped out of hyperspace above the planet Vrogas Vas, a wasteland surrounded by ashiest surface emissions and not much else. And it was the second Vader, alone in his custom TIE Interceptor, arrived that the fun began. In an interesting turning of the tables, Vader arrived in the middle of an X-Wing training exercise above the planet's surface. His surprise welcome party to the planet was not 1, not 2, but 3 X-Wing squadrons. It was just as much of a shock for either side, but both were unusually calm. The rebels believed it to simply be a wayward TIE fighter pilot, but Vader didn't break a sweat. He knew he was the better pilot. The only thing concerning him was whether this was a trap planned by Dr. Aphra, his most recent ally in his quest to undermine the Emperor. As he calmly questioned her over the intercom, the doctor declared her innocence, knowing that if Vader blamed her for the ambush, her work with the Empire would be short-lived. Vader turned back towards the planet and the squadrons of X-Wings. He could sense Luke. That was why he was here, and nothing was going to stop Vader from finding him. He began to charge toward the enemy craft. As the rebels dismissed this as a particularly plucky standard TIE fighter, they start casually to fire without moving. After all, there were far more of them than of their enemy. But things quickly fell apart for the squadrons. Amidst the electrical red flashes of the X-Wing blasters, Vader's interceptor swiftly slid through the laser labyrinth at great speed, much to the confusion of the rebels. One by one, the Sith Lord picked off the fighters with ease. The vacuum of space filled with red explosions as the X-Wings met their end. And just like that, one of the 3 squadrons was gone. 24 ships taken out in a few minutes. As Vader flew through his destruction, the other squadrons geared up. It was time for a full-on, no-holds-barred attack. After all, it was just 1 TIE fighter, right? Their arrogance proved fatal. Despite the many X-Wings against him, Vader was confident he would succeed. He drew on the dark side of the Force to guide his aim and movements. And the craft itself, his custom-made TIE Interceptor, was built with extra shields. He was unbeatable. As more and more X-Wings were plucked off, Vader's craft slid through each gap in their squadron line like a needle through thread, and exploding X-Wings decorated the sky behind him. Things started to get desperate for the rebels. They thought of their options and realized they still had their proton torpedoes, and they were locked on their target, meaning Vader couldn't swerve or slide his way out of this one. Relatively small compared to the onslaught of beaming incoming fire, Vader's interceptor remained still. Inside the cockpit, the Sith Lord was concentrating on using the Force. Almost as quickly as they were fired, the proton torpedoes suddenly started to veer off course as Vader concentrated his powers on them. Soon the rebel fire was destroying itself. As Vader powered through the explosions, undeterred, he was now flying across a mass sea of flames and debris, much to the shock and disbelief of the remaining rebel ships. But one rebel pilot could believe it. In fact, he knew exactly who was in the cockpit of the TIE fighter. Luke had arrived in his X-Wing, sensing the Sith Lord in his ship ahead of him. He informed his fellow pilots of the greater danger they were in, and how they could stop it. As more destruction followed his communication and cut it short, Luke's X-Wing had to dodge surrounding explosions as Vader's attack didn't let up. It was time for Luke to intervene. Just as Vader had done, the young Skywalker's X-Wing powered through the debris without hesitation. Much to the concern of his fellow pilots, Luke was heading for a one-on-one fight with the Sith Lord. Vader sped towards him. Soon, both Force users were on a direct course right into each other's craft. Vader wasn't yet aware of who was piloting the crazy X-Wing barreling towards him, but then he sensed it. It was Luke. Too late to choose any other maneuver, the 2 crafts smashed into each other. Caught in the planet's orbit, the smoking remains of Luke's X-Wing and Vader's TIE Interceptor began to slowly fall towards the planet's surface. Their crafts, spiraling out of control, filling the sky with black smoke and deep red fire, crashed. Vader was down, and so was Luke. Both men knew their adversaries well. Vader was aware of Luke's strength in the Force. Luke knew that Vader was the strongest Sith in the galaxy. The crash wouldn't be the end of either, and both knew it. Their fight would continue on the planet's surface, but that's a story for another time. Vader rarely had a chance to show off his dogfighting skills after the Clone Wars, and on this occasion the Rebels got a reminder of just how deadly he was. Even without his lightsaber, the space around Vrogas Vas had now become an almost floating graveyard, as X-Wing debris, deceased pilots, and abandoned astromech droids littered the stars. It was a dark day for the Rebellion, and there were many more dark days to come.